Did you know that a single head of lettuce can take over 20 years to decompose in a landfill? Typically, when we think of the decomposition process of foods, we assume that it takes a very short time, leading us to not think twice about tossing our leftovers or food in the trash. But what many of us don't know is that food can continue to release a harmful greenhouse gas called methane into the environment for countless years. According to the inventory of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions and sinks, landfills are responsible for 17% of overall U.S. methane emissions. Food waste itself equates to around 4% of overall greenhouse gas emissions. And while this may not seem like much, it is actually equivalent to 58 million cars worth of emissions. My name is Rachel Pelletier, and I have always been interested in finding ways to help out the environment. From my prior knowledge and experience, I knew that composting food to turn it into nutrient-rich soil was a great way to keep it out of the landfill. This led me to do my senior project on teaching 4 families in the community how to compost. I led them through informational sessions and provided them with other educational resources, as well as giving them the opportunity to integrate this habit into their daily lives. Every week, I picked up a bucket of food waste from each family and left them with an empty bucket to fill for the consecutive week. All of this food waste was then brought to a local farm in Hopkinton called Worksong Farm. They will use this food waste to contribute it to their compost pile, which they will utilize in the production of their crops. But I wanted to learn about bigger, more effective ways that we could reduce food waste in the United States. My research led me to believe that education of consumers and the action of companies is essential to tackling the issue of food waste. 40% of food waste comes from homes, demonstrating that there tends to be a lack of awareness or care towards food waste. The first step to addressing this issue is to impart a cultural shift on the perspective of food and the attitude of consumers. Have you ever been to the grocery store and seen a produce shelf full of carrots that looks something like this? I'm going to guess not and assume that most times this is more like what you see. Row upon row of shiny, uniform, flawless produce. But have you ever wondered what happens to the occasional funky-looking pepper that you put back in exchange for the more perfect option? This is often the most common result. Discarded and sent to a landfill, even though most times the food is perfectly edible. Worse yet, crops that took so much time and resources to produce are often left on the field to rot because they don't meet the cosmetic standards set by supermarkets. But what if we changed the way that we looked at food by realizing that it can still be delicious, nutritious, and safe, even when misshapen? Well, a French supermarket in 2014 took a step to address this issue by launching the Inglorious Foods campaign. They sold imperfect produce in special aisles and launched a national marketing campaign to, quote, glorify the inglorious. We can learn from the advocacy work like this done by other countries and call on our own supermarkets to follow suit and make change. Now, another common tendency that oftentimes drives waste is consumers' fixation on sell-by and best-by dates. Now, we all know the smell and sight of milk that sat far too long in our fridge and gone bad. But what about those crackers in your cabinet that you tossed because the expiration date was 2 weeks ago, even though they were completely unopened? Well, the truth is that many of these sell-by and best-by dates are simply tactics for companies and markets to sell their products quicker and drive consumer need, rather than equating to safe consumption. Now, I'm not saying that we should disregard all these labels and drink expired milk, but I am urging us to use our best judgment when determining if food is safe, rather than immediately discarding it. Now, this education is super important, but it can only go so far unless companies jump onto this growing movement to create their own sustainable solutions. One of the most practical ways to utilize food waste and keep it out of the landfills is to feed it to those in need. I want to share a few examples of some companies that have stepped up and taken this initiative. First up is Daily Table, a nonprofit grocery store in Dorchester, Massachusetts, that sells surplus foods from supermarkets that otherwise would be wasted at affordable prices. This ensures access to healthy foods for all. Another organization, Food Rescue US, uses the help of volunteers to collect surplus food from supermarkets and farms and ensure that it reaches the proper social service agencies. And while there is no chapter in New Hampshire, one can easily be started. Schools can even take part in this by partnering with Food Recovery Network. This was started by 4 kids on a college campus and has now reached over 200 colleges in 46 states. They gather leftover food from dining halls and other restaurants on or near campus and ensure that it gets in the hands of those who need it the most. With companies focused on feeding their leftover food to those in need, we will have much less food being wasted and less will go hungry. Now, another tactic that I want to touch on that companies can use is recovery, and this is a process of turning food waste into other useful products. Now, with the popularity and the growing meat industry in the United States, why not use our food waste to foster the more sustainable production of meat? This is the idea of EcoFeed, a Japanese company that focuses on taking food waste and creating safe feed for livestock, particularly pigs. This helps to reduce the carbon footprint of both landfills and agriculture. Now, products can also be made for human consumption. For example, Toast Ale, a European-based company, takes leftover bread and uses it as a substitute for a portion of the grain used to brew beer. This creates a profitable and more sustainable product. Another tactic that I want to mention is anaerobic digestion, and this is the process of taking food waste and turning it into a product called biogas through a chemical reaction. Though this biogas contains high levels of carbon dioxide and methane, when performed in a closed-loop circuit, this biogas can be used as a form of renewable energy without escaping into the atmosphere. General Mills has started to integrate this into their production process. In the production of their Greek yogurt, they use the whey, a byproduct of this yogurt. They put it into an anaerobic digester, and the biogas created from it, they use as renewable energy to power their production process. So if more companies were to responsibly utilize their waste like this and divert it from landfills, we would have much less waste on our hands. Now, composting is still a great option to keep your waste out of the landfills and put it back into our earth. Over each week, I collected around 41 pounds of food from the 4 families. And over the course of 2 months, this equated to roughly 372 pounds of food diverted from landfills. Now, I realize that this is not always an attainable option for families, and some aren't interested in producing nutrient-rich soils as they aren't growing their own produce. Not to fear, you can still help eliminate your food from the landfills and participate in composting through a program called Renewal Garden and Compost. This serves the Greater Manchester area, including Bow, and essentially what they do is run pickups of food similar to what I did. They do weekly or bi-weekly pickups of food waste from people's homes at a small cost. They take this food waste, they turn it into compost, and then ultimately nutrient-rich soil that they can sell to their other customers, and I believe come springtime, each customer also gets a free sample of this soil to use for themselves. So if you think you and your families might be interested in something like this, I highly encourage you to check it out. Now, taking into account the impact that food growth and production has on our environment, it is obvious we can't afford to be wasting so much of our food. But the sad reality is that 30 to 40% of food intended for human consumption is wasted, even when 800 million individuals experience hunger. If we want to help our environment and prevent future generations of food-insecure Americans, we need to make reducing our food waste a priority. This responsibility falls on both the consumer and companies. Education is key, whether that's programs run by the government or self-acquired research. And with this knowledge, more individuals and companies can be empowered to make changes to create a more sustainable future. And while this is a large and complex issue, it is important to note that each effort counts, no matter how small. So I encourage you to try your hand at reducing your waste to make a difference. Thank you. Any questions? Teddy?
So, in learning your project, did your food consumption and disposal and everything at home, did that affect your
Yeah, so we had always had a compost at home, so we made sure to put, our fruits and vegetable cuttings, coffee grounds, eggshells, things like that aside so that we could put it towards our compost. and keep it out of the trash. So we definitely stayed constant with that. I think it also improved, and I was definitely more aware of the things that I was throwing away. And even like going to the grocery store and buying things and realizing, oh, like we already have enough of that, I don't want to buy that, so that, you know, it gets wasted, or making sure the fridge was organized as it could be so that things weren't being overlooked and going bad. That definitely changed and improved, I think, throughout this process. Yeah. Emily?
Did you find that the people who started composting, were they more interested in like putting it towards the garden, or were they already gardeners?
Yeah, so I think a couple of families were gardeners. I know, Anna, your family has done gardens. But I think the general consensus was that nobody already had their own compost pile, and so it was really a new thing for everyone. And so, you know, once the project ended, I shared resources that the families could use to build their own compost piles, or if, for example, if they wanted to partner with Renewal Gardening Compost. Worksong Farm also, through their community-supported agriculture program, they offer pickups of food to put towards their compost pile. So one of the families actually opted to participate in that, so they're continuing to reduce their food waste and give it to Worksong Farm, which is great. And hopefully the other families will, come springtime, I think, more or less, like think about making their own compost piles and utilizing it for gardens and things like that. But I think for the most part, it was pretty new to everyone.